Okay, picture this. It's December 1978. Professor Malcolm Caldwell, this guy, uh, deeply knowledgeable about Southeast Asian history, like a real intellectual from the University of London.
A heavy hitter, yeah.
Totally. And kind of surprisingly, he had some quite positive views on North Korea. Anyway, he gets on a plane to Cambodia.
Right. And his goal was pretty ambitious.
Yeah, a rare sit-down with Pol Pot himself.
Right.
Caldwell and his colleagues, they thought this could be, historic.
A real moment.
Exactly. Fast forward just 3 days, and Caldwell's dead. And the way it happened, it's just this cruel, ironic twist.
It really makes you stop and think.
It does, and it sort of sets the stage perfectly for what we're digging into today. This fascinating and honestly sometimes unsettling idea of intelligent idiots.
Yeah, we're going to explore how people who, possess a ton of knowledge can somehow end up making remarkably poor decisions. It's like they get so attached to their own models, their way of understanding things, that they just ignore really clear signs that, well, reality isn't matching their model.
Exactly. I mean, have you ever met someone like that? Just dripping with smarts, throwing facts around.
Oh, yeah.
But their actual ideas, or maybe their actions, just leave you scratching your head, totally baffled.
Happens all the time.
So today, we're trying to figure out, why does that happen? We've got some pretty eye-opening examples lined up.
We do. Like behavioral scientists trying to predict something seemingly simple, like gym motivation.
Yeah, and financial whizzies, supposedly experts who mostly can't beat the stock market.
And even professional wine critics getting fooled by, well, a cheap bottle.
It really seems like knowing a lot doesn't automatically mean you make good judgments, does it?
Not at all. So let's try and break down this concept, intelligent idiots.
Yeah.
It's not really about lacking knowledge or, brain power.
Right.
It's more about people who have significant information, significant cognitive ability, but they just struggle to apply it effectively in the real world.
Or they can't update their thinking when new evidence comes along.
Exactly. It's like they're brilliant at reading the map,
Yeah.
but just terrible at actually navigating the terrain itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with that first example you mentioned, the behavioral scientists and gym motivation.
Right.
You'd assume these folks are the absolute experts on what makes people tick, wouldn't you?
You would think so.
But get this. When they actually tried to predict what would encourage people to exercise more, their predictions weren't just a bit off.
No.
They were actually worse than if they'd just guessed randomly.
Wow. Worse than chance.
Yeah. How does that even happen? All that theory, all that understanding leading to predictions that are just wrong.
Well, what's fascinating, I think, is that their models, however sophisticated they were about behavioral principles, they probably just failed to account for the, let's say, messy, unpredictable reality of human behavior in everyday life.
Yeah, that gap between theory and practice.
There can be a huge gap between understanding something abstractly and predicting how it actually plays out in a specific situation. I mean, think about fund managers, too.
Oh, right. The finance guys.
Their whole job, their entire profession, is basically about outperforming the market, generating better returns.
Supposedly.
Yet, study after study shows something like, over 90% of them consistently fail to do it?
90%. That's staggering. All that expertise.
All that deep knowledge of finance, complex models, it just doesn't translate into the result they're aiming for. Now, you could argue the market itself is just inherently random.
Sure. Too many variables.
Exactly. Countless unforeseen factors make consistent outperformance incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, regardless of how smart you are.
And then, okay, the wine tasters. This one always gets me.
Ah, yes, the wine tasting studies.
For years, different studies keep showing roughly the same thing. About 90% of professional tasters, these people with supposedly refined palates,
Right.
they can't reliably tell the difference between expensive and cheap wines in blind tests.
When they don't know the price or the label.
Exactly. All that training, that cultivated taste.
Yeah.
But hide the labels, and suddenly the expertise seems to, well, evaporate.
Maybe it's the context,
Yeah.
the expectation. If you expect a $100 bottle to taste amazing,
It probably influences what you perceive.
it seems likely. How much is truly sensory and how much is influenced by these external cues? Maybe even a subconscious desire to justify the price tag.
Right. It really makes you question things.
It absolutely does. It highlights how even in fields where expertise is highly valued and seems objective, these biases and maybe flawed assumptions can massively impact judgment. Which I think leads us nicely into this bigger issue, the danger of relying on models of reality that are, well, incomplete or flawed.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's loop back to Robert McNamara and the Vietnam War.
Right, McNamara, a classic case study.
This guy was like a data machine. Came from running Ford Motor Company, brought that same quantitative numbers-first approach straight into the Pentagon as Secretary of Defense.
To track everything.
Meticulously. Troop numbers, casualty figures, how much territory was supposedly controlled, all these metrics. And his analysis, based on this data, consistently showed the U.S. was, making progress. Winning, basically, year after year.
So he built this model, this picture of the conflict, based entirely on factors he could count, things he could measure.
Yeah.
And inside that model, the numbers looked good. They seemed to point towards an eventual victory.
But, and this is the crucial part, as we all know now, his model completely missed, or maybe ignored, these vital, non-quantifiable elements.
Things you can't just put in a spreadsheet.
Exactly. Like the sheer, unwavering determination of the North Vietnamese. You can't measure that easily.
Or the declining morale among U.S. soldiers.
Right. Or the massive corruption within the South Vietnamese government that undermined everything.
And the shifting political winds back home, public opinion turning against the war.
None of that fit neatly into his data-driven model.
Precisely. So his intellectual framework, which was so focused on the measurable, it completely missed these critical human, political, psychological dimensions of the war. And the consequences were, well, devastating.
It's such a stark example, isn't it? It just hammers home the point that any model, I don't care how smart it is, how complex, it's always a simplification of reality.
Always. It can't possibly capture every single variable.
Especially those fuzzy, intangible things that, ironically, often end up having the biggest impact.
And, we also need to think about the data itself. Is the data going into the model even reliable?
Ah, good point. Like the blue zones example.
Exactly, the blue zones. These regions famous for having lots of people living past 100.
Right, we've all seen the articles, the documentaries, the secrets to longevity, the specific diets, the lifestyle factors. It's become a really popular model for healthy aging.
It has. But it turns out, when you look closer, some of the actual data underlying that Blue Zone's research, it's got some serious question marks hanging over it.
Like what?
Well, issues with birth records, for starters. In some of these places, records weren't kept reliably. Maybe they were lost in wars, or people were registered much later in life.
Okay, so age verification is tricky.
Very tricky. Plus, there might have been incentives for people to actually exaggerate their age, maybe to get pensions earlier, or avoid military drafts back in the day.
Huh. I never thought of that.
And there's even some evidence suggesting that in certain regions there's an underreporting of people in their 90s, which kind of skews the perception of how many actually reach 100.
So the whole picture might be distorted from the start.
It potentially could be. So while the Blue Zone model itself, the advice about eating well, moving more, community, that might point towards generally healthy habits.
Sure, seems reasonable.
The data it's built on might not be nearly as solid as people assume. It's just another reminder that even models that seem well established can be resting on shaky foundations.
Which brings us back, in a way, to Malcolm Caldwell.
Yes, back to Caldwell. He had his model, right? He developed this really comprehensive understanding of Southeast Asia, but viewed it through a very specific Marxist lens. That was his framework.
Okay.
Then he goes to meet Pol Pot, a real-world, incredibly brutal embodiment of certain Marxist ideas, and he tries to apply his intellectual model to that horrific reality he encountered.
And the reality just completely overwhelmed the model.
Tragically, yes. The outcome was just grimly ironic, wasn't it? It underscores that ultimate truth. When an intellectual model clashes head-on with reality, reality always, always wins.
And what's a key thing we see with these intelligent idiots, as we're calling them? When that clash happens, when reality contradicts their model.
What do they do?
Instead of questioning the model, they often just double down on it, right? They become even more convinced they were right all along.
That's a really crucial characteristic. They get more entrenched, more defensive of their existing beliefs, even in the face of contradictory evidence.
Which I guess leads us perfectly to someone like Paul Ehrlich and his famous book, The Population Bomb.
Ah, Ehrlich, yes. Back in the late 60s, he wrote this book making these incredibly confident, dire predictions.
Like what? What did he predict?
Oh, mass starvation on a global scale, ecosystems totally collapsing, the oceans dying, even, famously, that England wouldn't exist by the year 2000. all within a few decades.
Wow. Bold predictions.
Extremely bold, and the book was hugely influential. Ehrlich became this major public intellectual, a leading voice on environmental issues, population control.
His model was basically catastrophic overpopulation leading to resource wars and famine.
That was the core of it. He gained a massive following. His ideas genuinely shaped government policies in some places.
The problem is,
The problem, of course, is that pretty much all of his major doomsday predictions just didn't happen. They failed to materialize.
so reality didn't match his model at all.
Not even close.
Sure.
But what really fits this intelligent idiot profile we're discussing is Ehrlich's reaction. He's persistently defended his original failed predictions.
He still defends them.
Oh, yeah. As recently as 2004, he was arguing his initial forecasts were actually too optimistic.
Too optimistic.
Can you believe it? And even in interviews this year, 2024, he's still doubling down, still advocating for drastic population control based on those same debunked ideas.
That's incredible, that unwavering commitment to a model that's been so demonstrably wrong.
It's a prime example, isn't it, of the phenomenon we're talking about.
And it's not just about sticking rigidly to old ideas, is it? We often see other patterns too, like a real resistance to even engaging with different viewpoints.
Definitely. A tendency maybe to shut down discussion.
Yeah, or overcomplicate things that are maybe quite straightforward, using lots of jargon.
Right, making it inaccessible.
And just an unwillingness to ever concede, maybe my model has flaws. It can come across as, well, intellectual arrogance.
It really can. And it makes you wonder, what's going on psychologically here? Why do very intelligent people cling so tightly to these models, even when they're clearly not working?
Yeah, what's the deeper reason? There must be something else going on.
Well, I think these models, these intellectual frameworks, they offer more than just a way to predict or understand the world. They can also provide a powerful sense of identity.
Ah, identity, like belonging to a group.
Exactly. And a sense of belonging. Think about online communities that form around very specific beliefs or ideologies, whether it's politics or science or whatever.
Okay.
Defending the group's model, the shared understanding, becomes a way of reinforcing your own identity within that group. It's about social connection, too.
So disagreeing with the model feels like a personal attack or an attack on your tribe.
It can feel that way for some people.
Yeah.
Consider some of the really passionate, sometimes, frankly, aggressive online debates you see around climate change, for example, or other hot-button issues.
Yeah.
Now, the underlying issues themselves might be incredibly important, right? We're not dismissing the substance. But the fervor, the intensity with which certain models are defended, it could be partly driven by this deeper psychological need for meaning, for connection, for validation within that intellectual community.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. It's not just about being right intellectually. It's about feeling like you belong.
Precisely. It's
Yeah.
important to understand those potential forces at play when individuals become so deeply invested in a particular framework.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now, trying to navigate this, information-saturated world we live in?
It's tricky, isn't it?
It is, because on one hand, the internet is amazing. It gives us access to so much information, allows us to explore different ideas, consciously choose which models we want to adopt or find useful.
That's the empowering side, definitely. But there's a paradox here, too.
Okay.
While the internet can expose examples of intelligent idiots and flawed thinking, the models that often gain the most traction online, the ones that go viral, aren't necessarily the most accurate or the most nuanced.
Right. It's often the loudest voices, the most extreme views.
Or just the most attention-grabbing, the most emotionally appealing narratives. Those tend to spread much faster and wider, sometimes regardless of their factual basis.
And there's another layer, too, isn't there? Because many of us, maybe we're spending more and more time online in the digital world.
Yeah, less time in the physical world.
And maybe less time directly interacting with messy, complex reality. So we're less likely to get that real-world feedback that could challenge our potentially inaccurate models. We're kind of insulated.
That's a really important point. There's less friction, fewer consequences for holding a wrong model if you're mostly online.
So what's the antidote then?
Well, maybe part of it is consciously choosing to engage more with the real world. Actively seek it out.
Like how?
Like, spend a bit less time passively scrolling and consuming online, and more time actually talking to people. Face-to-face conversations.
Especially with people who see things differently.
Absolutely. Engage in respectful disagreement. It sounds simple, but it's powerful. Building and maintaining strong, real-world relationships. That gives you a kind of emotional sustenance, a sense of connection.
So you're less reliant on clinging to an intellectual model for that feeling of validation or belonging.
That's the idea. You get those needs met through genuine human connection, not just through intellectual alignment.
Okay. And what about the models themselves? How should we approach them?
I'd say approach them with a healthy dose of skepticism, always. Think of them as tools. Yeah.
Tools.
Use them if they help you understand something, if they're useful for navigating a situation. But, and this is key, be ready to put the tool down, to discard the model the moment it proves unhelpful.
Or, crucially, when it clearly contradicts reality, when the map doesn't match the terrain anymore.
Exactly. Don't get so attached to the tool that you keep using it when it's obviously broken or the wrong one for the job.
Right. So I guess boiling it down, our deep dive today has really highlighted this difference between just having knowledge, just accumulating
Yeah,
facts.
and having the wisdom to apply it effectively.
Yeah, and staying open to new information, recognizing that even our best, most sophisticated ways of understanding the world have limits. They're never the whole picture.
Never. And the key takeaway, maybe, for you listening,
Yeah.
is that none of us are immune to this. We can all fall into this trap. Anyone can become an intelligent idiot if we're not careful.
If we become too attached to our own clever frameworks, too resistant to updating them when the evidence or just reality tells us otherwise.
It requires constant vigilance, really.
Yeah.
Self-awareness.
So maybe a final thought for you to chew on. As you go about your day, maybe pick one belief you hold or a model you use to understand something important.
Okay.
And just ask yourself, what kind of evidence, what kind of real-world experience might actually challenge this belief? What would it take for me to reconsider?
That's a great exercise.
Mm.
Because it's in that willingness to question ourselves, to engage in that kind of critical thinking, that we can hopefully steer clear of those pitfalls of intellectual rigidity we've been talking about.
Keep asking questions, stay curious, and don't fall too deeply in love with your own map.